Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about seeing historical figures in board games. This is something I've kind of alluded to a little bit in the past. I've discussed board games that have a historical context as well as board games that you can learn from. Essentially today I wanted to really focus on board games that put a particular person or group of people front and center within a particular game. That is to say, you can learn a little bit of how those people behave, what they did, what they're famous for, all of that kind of thing. It's a really neat way to learn. It's really fascinating, and there's a lot of games that do it rather well. That said, as always, I need to know what you guys have to say. What are your personal favorites that put particular historical figures front and center? Let me know anything and everything you think in the comments below. But with that, we're going to jump right on in with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Historical Conquest. This is a relatively unique card-based skirmishing game where every single card in the deck, be it an event, a location, a person, an artifact, or any number of other things, are all based off of actual historical people, places, and things. It's really fascinating to see, and all of the cards in the deck have an extensive amount of text on them describing what the thing was, what it did, how it was related to a historical context, all of that kind of thing. The reason that it's so low on the list though is because the game itself is a little bit muddled. It's really tough to get into. You guys can check out my review if you want to learn more about it. But that said, the actual knowledge you can gain from this is truly incredible. But the fact is that you've got a whole bunch of different timelines in here, so you can learn a lot about individual little pieces of things. It's not super focused, but it's still a good game that has a lot of great historical information. Historical Conquest, my number 5. At number 4, I've got Lewis and Clark, the game about the eponymous duo who very famously explored the Louisiana Purchase, as well as farther west into what was going to become the United States of America as we know it today. Essentially, the game is so low on the list though because it takes a weird spin on what Lewis and Clark actually did. Essentially, they were exploring this territory, learning from the Native Americans, learning all of the different flora and fauna, mapping out and charting the entirety of the land, all of this kind of stuff. And the thing is that the game interprets it, or it puts it in the context of a race. You've got players who are racing to reach the Pacific Ocean first. So I can see it in terms of kind of like a Manifest Destiny and expanding west and all that kind of thing, but it takes it out of the historical context of what Lewis and Clark were actually doing. That said, it's still a wonderful game, and they've got some great little historical tidbits involved in it. And on top of that, it's really well done. The mechanics are great, and it's simply fun to play. Lewis and Clark, all in all, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Tesla versus Edison, War of the Currents. I really love how the historical context is integrated into the theme and overall ideas and mechanics of this game. Essentially, the idea is that you're trying to create an electric company that you're spreading across the United States in the very early days of electricity. So effectively, Thomas Edison, at least first and foremost, was very much a businessman. So historically, it does make sense to see that. But one thing I really love to see is the fact that they have very famous inventors, electricians, well, electrical researchers, all of that kind of stuff, as people that you can hire, join, become, all of that kind of thing. It's absolutely amazing. I love how well it's integrated. And the thing is that it's middle of the road on this particular list because you don't get as much actual history and historical information of what the actual events were that occurred. But the fact that you have real people who you can read about and see what they actually did, there's little blurbs on some of the cars and things like that. It still makes for a wonderful game, not to mention the fact that mechanically it's a great experience and wonderful overall. Tesla versus Edison, my number 3. At number 2, I've got the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This is a very unique game on this particular list in that the eponymous person, King Ludwig, doesn't appear at all in the game. Essentially, the idea is that I love the game for the way that it integrated his personality into the theme and mechanics and central idea of what you're doing. So effectively, King Ludwig II of Bavaria was rather infamous in that he was declared insane during his rule. He spent spent essentially the entire treasury trying to make these very lavish castles, such as Neuschwanstein, pictured here on the box, and essentially the next day he died. It is thought that he drowned himself in the lake of the asylum, but it's honestly not really known. Essentially, within the game, you're playing as a building contractor who's trying to make sure that you can assemble the rooms of the castle in such a way that will make the king happy. So it's kind of interesting because this is the game where you really see the person's personality coming through in terms of what they were known for and how he was known to act. That said, you won't get too much in terms of actual history from it, but it's just kind of neat to see the theme integrated so much into the personality of the person. So that's why Castles of Mad King Ludwig is my number 2. At number 1, I have a little bit of a cheat in that it's a massive category as well as group of games, and that is to say a lot of war games, and particularly the Command and Colors series. So in a lot of these games, you will see very specific generals or people listed, where you have things like Napoleon and Hannibal. You also have very specific battles that had been fought, all sorts of different stuff like that. And the fact is that this is where you would see a lot of very direct translation from what happened in a historical context into a board game setting. We see a lot of skirmish games, a lot of war games, all of this kind of stuff, where we can see essentially this is what happened at the Battle of Waterloo, for example, or whatever it happens to be. And so you can learn at least about these very famous combat generals, what they did, where they did it, how they did it. You can see things also like Axis and Allies and stuff along those lines, but those become really abstract, so it can be a little bit tougher to go around it. So that's why I wanted to focus more on Command and Colors specifically. They're all published by GMT Games. They're famously rather complicated. I've only played a couple of them, but I absolutely love the ones that I've played. They're tremendously fun, and I highly recommend them for both their strategic context as well as their historical context as well. Command and Colors series, along with a lot of these sort of skirmish, battle-specific war games, end up collectively being my number 1. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 favorite historical figure-centric board games. Like I said, this is kind of an interesting theme because you can see a lot of board games where a random person's name is slapped on it, and you can also see a lot of board games that have historical folks in them, but they're not necessarily central to what the game is all about. So, of course, as always, I want to know what you guys have to say about it. Do you like seeing this type of thing in board games, and why? Is it something that you find that you can actually learn from, or is it something where you can just say, oh, cool, I recognize this, and so you can sort of become more immersed in it? Let me know anything and everything that you think in the comments below, because you know I'd love to hear from you. That said, as always, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages where you'll be able to interact with myself as well as my channel in a whole bunch of really fun and very cool ways. But once again, thank you very, very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.